Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
Welcome to Sense and Sustainability. I'm Sean McCarthy, Director of Action Sustainability Community Interest Company, and I'm delighted today to welcome Alastair Coulstock from Australia. Al, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here and great to be on your podcast.
So, Al, you and I have worked together before a few years ago, and I know your career has been quite varied over the years, and I'm sure our audience are going to be very interested to hear from you. So, can we just kick off by just talking a little bit about your background and how you got to where you got to in working in sustainability?
Certainly. Well, I first started out way back in the UK as a mechanical engineer. That was my first sort of foray out of university. And that was just off the back of a part-time job through holidays while I was working at uni. I actually wanted to be an industrial engineer, industrial designer. Couldn't get a job edgeways, but was working for an industrial extraction systems company in holidays. And so moved from my hometown in Bedfordshire to Bristol, applied for 3 jobs at the time in building services and managed to pick, well, I got offered all 3, but managed to pick up one with a company called Kennedy and Donkin. And they were a multidisciplinary building services company. And so that was the start of my career in mechanical design, which we were starting to look at energy efficiency in buildings. And a lot of the work that Kennedy and Donkin was doing was for hospitals. So we were looking at designing the Royal Berkshire Hospital refurbishments and the Royal Bristol Children's Hospital were the two big projects that I was working on at the time. Had a little bit of a break in 2000. I was saving up to go traveling at the time and went through South America. And as all Brits do, it's easy to pick up a holiday working visa for Australia. And 6 months through South America, which was amazing. Ended up on the shores of Australia and looking for a job. And luckily picked up a mechanical job again. But within about 6 months of that, there was an opportunity to set up Bassett Applied Research, as it was known back then. So Bassett Consulting Engineers was a multidisciplinary. And that was essentially the start of ESD sectors, or the sustainable design sectors that were being advisory services added on to building service engineering companies and consultancies at the time. This was back in 2001. And interestingly enough, at that time, really, when getting involved in sustainable buildings, all you could really do was get involved in a project at design development stage, very late in the piece, prescribe high efficiency motors and paint the building green. And that was about all you could do at the time. But in 2003, we saw some of the green rating systems come out in Australia. I think BREEAM had already been launched back in either 99 or 2001, I believe. So Green Star, the Green Building Council's Green Star rating scheme came out in 2003. And also we had ABGR, which is the Australian Building Greenhouse Rating Scheme, which is now called Neighbours, which I know has been launched in the UK now as well. And that was really the sort of the start of the sustainable sector, essentially, in Australia, and very fortunate to work on a number of fantastic buildings at the time through those periods. So premium green, as I like to say. It was essentially, the catalyst was the federal government and state governments getting behind Green Star rated or Neighbours rated office buildings or fit outs. And so the Green Star design and office design and as-built rating tools were the ones that took off and went exponentially. And so we were really fortunate to be working on quite a few of those buildings whilst I was at a company called Cundall Johnson, as you would know it in the UK, Cundall Johnston and Partners. And very fortunate to work across all sort of sectors of the built environment. So whether it be healthcare, hotels, office buildings, residential, aged care and retirement facilities as well. And then in 2012-13, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia was formed, or ISCA as it was known, and they brought out their infrastructure tool, the IS rating tool. And so again, fortunate enough to work on a few great projects through that time. Still working for Cundall really at that time, and then in 2016 branched out on my own, and very shortly after I met up with Mark Lister, our old business partner, and of course was introduced to you, Sean. And from that point in time, we set up Action Sustainability, the Asia Pacific branch, which was fantastic. It was really linking. We had three services we were really driving. One was myself with more of that technical role, looking at sustainability in buildings and infrastructure, looking at daylight, energy modelling, decarbonisation, materials, etc. But then Mark was focused on the ESG strategy and materiality studies for organisations, looking at objectives and targets, and then putting together action plans at enterprise level. And our friend and other business partner, Jean-Louis Hay, was the Australian delegate together with you, Sean, for the ISO 2400 standard, which was launched in May 2017. So essentially, as Action Sustainability, we were doing all things sustainability from enterprise level right the way down through the built environment and construction, and then into the supply chain. Fortuitously, I suppose, looking back, we started a conversation up with one of the big four and ended up getting acquired just before COVID hit, which was a very interesting time indeed. And as I say, fortuitous, because at that time, sustainable procurement and ESG strategy services were nice to have. And so when clients got a little bit cautious around, because of what was the unknowns around COVID and COVID-19 hitting the world, a lot of those projects ground to a halt or were put on pause for a while. Fortunately, the building construction side of things continued on their finance projects, and so they rolled on. So I spent 3.5 years with one of the big four, and then came out on the other side. I've had a couple of little appointments with other companies, but decided to go back out on my own 4 months ago, and I am now founder and director of Coulstock Consulting again, and loving being master of my own destiny.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like being self-employed for a certain type of people. I would certainly agree with that. I think it took me about 20 years to discover I didn't really fit the corporate mould, but I got there eventually. It's several interesting aspects there. You talk about the rating systems, kind of being the driver for some of the early work that you were doing on sustainable design, etc. And I guess if I look at sort of BREEAM, the Green Star and all of those things, they do seem to have made a difference, but equally they seem to sometimes to constrain innovation and to take you down certain paths. I mean, I've certainly worked with a lot of clients that they're interested in how many points they're going to get on BREEAM, and that's it. It doesn't really matter what you do, whether it makes a difference or not, or whether it's a sensible solution or not. It suddenly becomes all about the BREEAM points and not necessarily about the sort of overall sustainability of the building. Any thoughts on that, or any examples that you've seen where the rating systems have worked well or not so well?
Yeah, it's a very good observation, Sean, and it's something that we always try and bring back into the projects to really get our clients to really understand, what they're doing it for, the objectives and targets. As an example of that, exactly as you said, back in those days in 2005, 6 or 7, when the rating tools had come out and the federal government, state government had started mandating these targets, there were very few trained sustainability consultants around. And unfortunately, the market just went straight to that tick box exercise because they hadn't been trained up in first principles design. Now, as a matter of course, what we like to do is to look at the objectives of the client, of the building, of the situation, of the site, the location, and work through that concept from first principles, looking at orientation, looking at passive design opportunities, and then active design opportunities to get the best out of the concept before you even start to look at the rating tools. And in that way, you can get your 5 stars or your 6 stars, but you might not be paying so much for it because you're actually building in a responsive design solution for that location or for the occupants or for the community that it's going to be for it at the end of the process and the end of construction. But unfortunately, the industry grew so fast, and without the understanding of that first principles design, and so we are in a lot of respects in that space where it is just a tick box. It comes with a building. It has to be 5-star. Go down the checklist and make sure we meet it. And some of those items on that list might just be on there because we need to reach that specific star rating. Having said that, the other side of it, which is important, and I've seen this a lot over the years, clients start off with best intentions, and actually it's the gateway process that we have in terms of development applications and compliance that actually knock sustainability out of designs. So many cases across the years I've seen where, as I say, clients start off with best intentions. We go down this path with first principles design. We have these great initiatives built into the concepts. We get to development application stage, and the client wants to produce a vanilla sustainability, environmentally sustainable design report to put into council because they don't want to be adversely impacted by the council, who may or may not have an environmental person who's understanding the process properly on the other side. And what we've seen is councils picking up an ESD report and saying, you have to do everything that's written into this report, because the report's been created. Not only has it got performance metrics in it, but it's got specific items. A good example here in Australia would be, cogeneration or trigeneration systems in buildings. Now, we know that from concept design through to practical completion could be anywhere between 2 and 4 or even 5 years. Technologies change, and sometimes developers have been locked in to a solution at that early stage which doesn't actually make economic sense or environmental sense, at the time when they could have changed out for some other solution. And so invariably developers start to get a bit cautious about that, and clients get a bit cautious. They wind it back to minimum standards, and then the project never picks up again. And all those initiatives that were created in the first concepts, when the gateway is through and you're into design development stage, you don't pick up all the sustainable initiatives that were in it. So that's the unfortunate truth of the gateways that we have to go through from a compliance perspective, which impacts design. And so from a Green Star or a sustainability ratings perspective, at least there is a level that is embedded in right at the start. And how you get to that point of 5-star Green Star, you can pick a multitude of credits to get there. The other real benefit that we saw from the rating tools coming out, certainly in those early days, as I said before, it was sort of really focused on energy and probably water. And if you're lucky enough to pick up a project with the university, you might do some daylight analysis as well, and looking at, shading and making sure there were some passive design solutions. So energy, water, waste was typically the key items before Green Star came out. We saw a complete transformation of the industry around IEQ, indoor environment quality, and in particular, low VOC paints, for example. So if you remember 2003, there probably were practically zero low VOC paints, sealants and adhesives in the marketplace. And when you went on site, and the poor contractors and labourers who were painting these buildings or putting these sealants up, they're breathing these high VOC toxin products all day long. Within 5 years, it was practically changed. The whole market was changed. And nowadays, it's very rare to even get hold of high VOC paint, sealants and adhesives. So there's been some significant positives from it. And now certainly with the GBCA, they're plugging the climate positive pathway, really starting to ramp up the reduction in carbon emissions in buildings and in operation as well. And now, of course, with UK, you would have seen embodied carbon, upfront carbon requirements as well. So yes, we still go to that tick box scenario, but invariably clients and developers in particular like to have that third-party governance structure in place that then does drive they know they're going to get a sustainable outcome. And then when you look at it from a financial and capital markets perspective, That's the other flip that's happened since 2017. Probably is for me is one of the big markers in the time frame. We really didn't get much traction until financial markets and capital markets came to play. But now that they're looking for that third party governance around sustainability on assets and infrastructure.
So I guess we wouldn't be where we are without the rating systems. I think they've taken us to where we need to be, and yes, it's not perfect. They're not perfect systems, but they certainly bring benefits. Do you see demand for, if we look at the sort of the other side of sustainability, the social side, do you see demand in Australia for social objectives in buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. It is starting to ramp up. It is a little bit further behind, I would suggest, than the UK. We are starting to see social value requirements. Infrastructure has certainly picked it up faster than probably buildings. So, as an example, Sydney Metro, Transport for New South Wales, whilst building the Northwest Rail Link was one of the first ones, but now the rest of the Sydney Metro network, a significant number of social requirements were built into the actual reference design and brief documents going out to the contractors. Essentially, what I believe happened was they looked at where social requirements and social value was progressing in the UK, thought that looks like a nice to have, we'll build some of those in directly. And what I've read and what I've seen is it was quite a bit of a shake-up for the industry, because the clients here that were starting to push it a little bit didn't have a long process with industry to bring them up to speed and bring them on board with the reporting requirements that came with it. It was more a case of UK is doing all this great stuff. Okay, let's borrow some of those metrics and targets and slap them into a brief and then see how the industry responds. And to be fair, the industry's responded really, really well. There's definitely challenges, so we have in infrastructure space, we typically see, I think we're up to about 35%, or about 30% probably, non-financial requirements in evaluations. That's not to say that's all social and environmental, but we're up to that point, which I think is a little bit behind the UK, but not far off now. Within those briefs, so this is going back to probably 2017, 2018, with Sydney Metro in particular, that those briefs that we were working on for Central Station had upskilling of local LGA businesses, number of appointments for local government area businesses, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander representation, businesses being involved, a certain percentage of businesses being involved in the projects, trainees and training of cadets for the main contractor, a certain number of Cert 4 certificates for education to be achieved across the board, and diversity and inclusion targets. Now, as we all know, some of those sort of targets are really pretty hard to nail down and to achieve on big jobs, but we saw that in infrastructure. Buildings, we're starting to see it a little bit more. Predominantly, again, buildings is being driven by the rating schemes that are out there more so, but I believe we're going to start seeing them a little bit from the mandatory reporting that's coming through as well.
So you mentioned as well embodied carbon and those dreaded words, Scope 3, particularly in infrastructure, seems to be becoming quite a thing as organisations are looking in more detail at their carbon footprints and discovering that very high percentages of their carbon are actually in their Scope 3, in their supply chain, and of course with infrastructure possibly slightly differently for buildings. The embodied carbon footprint is sometimes the more significant of those issues. How are you seeing that in Australia? You mentioned, as I mentioned, embodied carbon becoming a thing. How's that going?
So there's a few different viewpoints to this. If we take it from a buildings perspective, in New South Wales in particular, we have the new sustainability SEP, which is actually dated 2022, but it's really finalised in 2023, and it was launched on the 1st of October 2023. Generally speaking, what it means is that all state significant development applications, which are the larger projects, and commercial buildings have to report on their embodied carbon at development application. So after they finish their concept design and they're looking for approvals, and then report on them again at construction certificate before they can break ground. So that's come into effect. That's starting to quantify essentially what we need to do, which is great. In the residential sector, the Basics tool in New South Wales has also adapted its tool to then reflect the amount of embodied carbon going into that particular tool that measures it. Before, it's just really been focused on thermal performance of residential buildings, and then there's a study around energy and water and the reduction of, based on an average New South Wales dwelling, that was the base case essentially. So we're starting to see quantification of embodied carbon in particular. Where it gets really interesting, I think, for me, and this is where I've really enjoyed joining the dots, where we started working with enterprise and that ESG strategy space, and now having the knowledge of the buildings, is how that scope 3 for enterprises is actually manifesting us in various different ways. So as an example, a few years ago now, we were requested to assist one of the big banks, Big Four, in looking at the energy efficiency of one of their lending books. So this is a bank that's got a lot of grade B, grade C buildings on their books. So they're not the premium grade buildings that the tier 1 developers would be producing, but levels below that, they may be in sort of the regional areas. They would have, fairly well tenanted half the time, foreign investors or mums and dads investors. So not necessarily that up to speed in terms of capacity around sustainability. But the other challenge of these types of buildings is that if you were to provide an energy refurbishment and an energy upgrade of that building, it's the tenants that are actually getting benefit from it and not the building owner. So back in around 2008, 2009, a guy called Niall McCarthy, Eureka Funds Management, if I remember rightly, created this environmental upgrade agreement, which was a fantastic product. And essentially what it did was, if you could demonstrate that the cost of paying back a loan for improving the energy efficiency of your building was equal to or less than the energy savings that was gained from doing these upgrades, you could pass that cost through to the tenants via the rates, the council rates. So the tenants would see zero change on day one, and on year 10 they would have a significant reduction in energy consumption, and both would win. However, the challenge with that situation, or that system, was the contract was a little bit more onerous, so the big guys just went and did it themselves, and finance was significantly cheaper back then as well. But also, no one really could find these grade B, grade C building owners because they were those foreign investors and there wasn't really a list. Well, fast forward to, say, 2 years or so ago, we're being asked by the banks because fundamentally they saw that mandatory reporting was coming, and Scope 3 is their lending book. And so at some point they saw that their sustainability strategy would see a 0 or 1 star neighbours rated building through the mandatory disclosure scheme that we have over here. They would not be able to lend to them. So they're producing products that they could offer to their existing clients and say, hey, we'll give you a free loan with no costs attached. You can upgrade your building. We'll get someone to verify that it can be done within a certain payback period. It's economically viable, and then we can lend you the money and you can get your upgrade and everyone's happy and we can keep lending to you. So that's one way I've seen Scope 3 manifest itself, which is an interesting one. The other one was essentially a large developer looking at renewable energy schemes, wind farms, solar arrays out in rural Queensland, and they wanted someone to partner with them to find some of their suppliers, assess their suppliers, and then help them provide a bit of a decarbonisation plan. So again, it was the suppliers working with the suppliers, which is essentially this developer's Scope 3 emissions. That's what's interesting about that Scope 3 scenario, is that you don't necessarily have to be one of the bigger companies to be affected by it. The bigger companies are being affected because they're in the direct firing line of mandatory reporting, or the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards, which they are over here. I think in the UK, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but you are following ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. That be correct? Or are you part of the European CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive?
Yeah, in the UK, we're not part of CSRD. But what we're finding, of course, is there are so many European businesses that are required to report against CSRD, then it's happening anyway. So it's not a legal requirement in the UK, but it's unavoidable. It's just, any companies that are parented in, Germany, France, Italy, wherever, or if they've got clients that they're serving in the EU, then they're required to report against CSRD. So CSRD is just happening by default. It's not a legal requirement in the UK, but it's completely unavoidable.
And so another place that we've seen it, not so much, was partly Scope 3, but it's also related, is we're working with another commercial property owner. They have their ESG strategy out there, publicly listed company, up in writing on their website, and they're concerned with making sure that they're not impact washing. So as a result, they have the larger projects that they manage, and they would be attracting the Green Star type ratings or the neighbours ratings, and so that third party governance is there for the most part, covering off most of their risks. But some of the smaller fit outs don't necessarily attract those ratings, so they wanted us to help them out and look at a way that they could start to work with their smaller packages and the smaller trades, the contractors and sub-trades. So we got on board. We carried out a bit of a gap analysis using the ISO 2400 standard to assess the developer and owner against industry standard. And then we created a little bit of a risk assessment against the trades that were coming through and would be appointed for the works, and then monitor and verified those trades and the contractor through to practical completion, and then fed those results back to the client to then be essentially incorporated into their ESG reporting structure and up to the strategy. And they found that very, very useful work that was really providing them some great insights. And at the time, it's there's a lot of work to be done at that end of the market, and so it wasn't really, it's not a stick approach. It's more a collaborative approach to say, hey, where are you at as a contractor, as a sub-trade, as a trade? Can you hit these targets? Are these targets realistic? What needs to change? What are the pitfalls? What are the opportunities? And really, it was a very, very collaborative approach to say, look, let's all, as an industry, move forward on this, because we know, we want to make the industry better. And that was, again, it's really quite refreshing working with clients that know that it's a journey, and it's not just throwing a stick and a hard contract at somebody and trying to make them jump through hoops. It's how does everyone learn together and improve. Whilst that's not Scope 3 directly, there was Scope 3 involved in that, and we were actually monitoring and verifying embodied carbon. It was also covering off diversity and inclusion targets, which, as you can imagine, are fraught with danger in the construction industry. They're just, practically, they're just really, really, really difficult to hit because of the nature of the way the construction industry attracts. Just 95% is male to female split. And so really tackling that type of problem, you would have to go back to education. Who's coming through the education centres and the universities, getting into the roles that are either construction management or into engineering, to then be able to impact any diversity and inclusion targets.
So a lot of interesting things there. Well, thanks very much, Al. This is part 1 of 2 podcasts with Al. We look forward to part 2 in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.